place. We're actually born with lots and lots and lots of sub personalities. In their natural form, it's kind of I see it as, this is not Dick, I suppose, but I see it as the energy that helps us to express the higher self. And we're born with it in its natural state. It's very innocent, it's very creative. It's to help us to sort of navigate the world in a kind of a playful and happy kind of way. But what happens in childhood is we get exposed to all kinds of adversity and different kinds of experiences. So the parts have to take on a different role. It's almost like it has to rewire itself to accommodate what we begin to think is a very unsafe environment. Because even with, with the best sort of childhoods in the world, we go into a school system, for example. Parents often, well, it doesn't come with a manual, as we know, sort of parenting children. So it's very and this energy as well in the system is very, very, very sensitive. So when it hurts, it really hurts. It really hurts when we're in childhood and things happen to us. And that can be sort of disruptions in attachment. It can be somebody tutting at us, somebody rolling their eyes at us. It can be very wounding, which it's very wounding as adults, but it's super sensitive in childhood. So the parts begin to take on different roles. I'm going to talk more about that and more about what those roles are, because Dick spent a lot of time sort of mapping this out and understanding it. The parts, while they're there in our system, are kind of communicating with us all the time. We're hearing them, and yeah, we can hear when this is what we might be calling our thinking that's going on in our minds. And usually there's kind of judgment going on in there, or criticizing, or we're what ifing, and we're going into the future, and might be dragging us into the past, and we just find ourselves there, or we're wanting to, like, we're just pondering on things, and there's a lot of activity that's going on in the system all of the time. And most of the time we're just kind of like letting that happen. We're not even really consciously aware or consciously connected to it. What we are experiencing usually is an emotional reaction. So this system is very much plugged into the emotional system. We're learning more about the nervous system now. There's some amazing work done by a chap called Stephen Porges, the polyvagus nerve theory. We're really understanding how the interaction between thoughts and impulses and images and our emotional system, and therefore our behavior, and how that all interacts into the body, into the myofascia, into the psoas muscle, the way that we react and we hold and we tense these things. As this system is kind of like running, it seems like it's running itself. And, as humans, we tend to think that we're kind of at the peril of it as well. When we have a dilemma, for example, we can often hear that there's even a conflict going on in there. Maybe we're doing things that we don't really want to do, and we feel like we can't stop that. And we can kind of see, I sometimes see it as kind of like a warehouse of all this kind of unruliness going on. And and that's what's organizing our lives. And it's been kind of mystified. And again, from this mono view, it's very, very, very complicated and difficult to try and make sense out of it. But when we look at it from multiplicity, we can super make sense out of it, and it's actually extremely empowering. IFS is extremely empowering because it gives us the kind of the navigation tool that we need to be able to access this and to heal it. That's the huge message in here, that this isn't set in stone. This is not forever. This is something that we can relate to, and that we can heal as well. We don't have to pathologize it. But just popped to mind, there are people that identify as hearing voices. And there's been a long movement in the psychiatric field around this as well. And IFS can really help us to understand that, and how we can interact with these voices, which I see as parts in our mind. So it helps us to move on from the mono mind theory and the medical model theories, and from the mono mind as well, when we might be sort of having an irrational, as it sort of gets termed in this in the other sort of models. And I'm CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy background, and we're very much trained to look at these kinds of experiences that we have as being wrong in some way. Like, we've got a dysfunctional thought, we've got irrational thoughts, we've got negative core beliefs in there that we shouldn't have, and the emphasis is about, you know, changing those. There's the chimp paradox book, I think it's called, and these kinds of like approaches which kind of view it in that kind of way. And in lots of ways, if we understand it, kind of reduces the extent to what these parts really are, by minimizing them into those kinds of descriptions. So we might be spending a lot of time sort of like trying to change our behaviors and using willpower quite often to override something. So let's say, you know, we have a fear of doing presentations. There might be a part that we hear telling us that it's going to be a disaster and that we shouldn't do it, and it tries to keep us small. Again, when we remember that it's wired principally with the priority of safety, we can begin to understand why that is the case. So we might try and override it. You know, we might feel really embarrassed that we feel like this, and so we try and hide that. And then what we tend to do is adapt our lifestyles around these fears because we don't know what else to do. And maybe avoid, you know, we go into this is where the behavioral aspect of it sort of then begins to create more loops. It might just be that we choose never to do presentations or even to speak in front of a group of people. You know, that could be very overwhelming for fragile systems that are trying to remain safe. And I'll explain why in a little minute. So we have moved on a little bit kind of in the field. We've had the introduction into Western society of kind of like mindfulness practices. And we have people like Eckhart Tolle. And even maybe looking into sort of principles of Buddhism that have come over to the West as well. There's an encouragement to deal with this. I always say like we're dealing with it by not dealing with it, but we're dealing with these energies by meditating and using perhaps like mindfulness, which is a kind of step in the right direction, because in meditation and mindfulness, at least we are starting to kind of differentiate ourselves from these thoughts and these impulses by, you know, training ourselves to come into what we refer to as self energy, but finding that place of being the observer, of being the witness, and beginning to sort of relate to it that way, and just by, you know, sort of letting it go and sort of allowing the thoughts to pass over, as it were. So we're kind of getting an awareness of them, but we're still we're still ignoring them. And it hasn't until this model really been emphasized that we can actually turn into these thoughts and connect with them. And there's a whole world in there when we do that, which is really fascinating. This is why I stopped using the other kind of therapy models, because once I started sort of holding space for people to start exploring this inner realm, I was just fascinated. And, you know, it's like watching, it is sometimes with some sessions as I'm holding space, it's like watching movies. um, it really is. And for some people, when they go into this inner realm, it's very clear. They have a very sort of wonderful, kind of really animated, detailed inner landscape inside their own psyche. Some say we're actually tapping into the limbic region of the brain. We're actually looking at where all this is conceptualized. And the neurosciences are backing this up now and, you know, really confirming these are not woo-woo ideas. This is what's actually happening in the brain. It's so fascinating as we go into the inner realms. And for some people, it's not like that. It's a little bit murky. We might just sort of make out some sort of shapes. It's a little bit like that for me in my inner realm. And there's a little bit of sort of like guesswork. It feels like, oh, we've just got a sense. Dick Schwartz, who developed this, doesn't see anything in his inner realm. But that certainly hasn't stopped him. You kind of just tune in and you get a sense of what's going on in there. So, you know, it's absolutely fascinating. So, and we find, yeah, when we turn into these thoughts, and it's not like we're just asking the thoughts to kind of pass over and as little clouds or whatever, we're turning in and we're going to the source of the thoughts, if you like. We're finding out, why do we keep having this same thought over and over again? You know, it can get a little bit monotonous in there, especially with our fears, especially when we're worrying, especially the what if, you know, the thoughts that have started off with the what if stuff, like we have the same fears. that are happening to us. And Dick like really started to map this out. I'll just say a bit about his background actually, because he graduated with a PhD in family therapy, in family systems therapy. So he was actually working with families in homes, you know, in sort of in real life, as it were, and was understanding the different dynamics between interactions in families, which can get a little bit archetypical, like having the authoritarian father and then the heroic child, and you know, these sort of different arrangements. And he was pretty convinced back then, back in the 80s. I think he contributed to the main manual for external family systems work. And he just thought that, you know, if we could change these arrangements in the family, then people will get better. And that was kind of like the big thing back in the 80s. And then was on a placement in, actually it was an eating disorders clinic, working one-to-one. And he wasn't a big fan of like what we call like intrapsychic kind of ways of working, but he was working with, you know, quite distressed women generally with bulimia and anorexia, and was really trying to get to understand and be working with the external families, and it just really wasn't working. So he was spending the time to sit and really communicate with them. And he just started to pick up on the language that the clients were using. So he's asking, like, you know, why do you binge? The response would be something like, well, there's a part of me that you know is hearing a really strong criticism, and when that happens, there's another part of me just wants me to go and eat, just wants to try and get away from that feeling. So he started to inquire and ask more and more questions. And in one particular session, he connected with a part in somebody's system and that was actually causing her to self-harm and to cut. And this was a big turning point in the understanding of this, because what he did in that particular session was he told the part not to do it again. And it took her, you know, a couple of hours and kind of decked it, if you like, and made it promise not to cut her. And it kind of conceded and said, okay, all right, you know, we won't do that. And then he said when he opened the door the next week, she was stood there and she actually had a big gash down her face. And he said he just collapsed in that moment and shifted and said, you know, I don't want to fight this. I don't want to fight these parts. And the part speaking through the client spoke back and said, I don't want to fight either. And something just shifted, and he felt this sort of compassion towards the part that was causing that, and it just opened up this whole different dialogue between himself as a therapist and her part that was cutting. And when he explored and asked the part why it was doing that, it transpired that the part really took this role on very seriously to protect the client, to protect the person, and that it had been developed earlier on in her life when she was being abused, and it was a reaction to that and a way to get her out of her body. And to also suppress the rage that was rising, because the rage would have got her into even more trouble. So this was a tactic that the psyche had developed to protect her. And that, you know, I can just feel tingly even thinking about that, you know, and sort of feeling into the compassion for that. Because what looks like quite destructive behavior from the outside, when we really start to connect with it with compassion, we understand that there's a very, very good reason for it being there. And I just love how this kind of opens up the way that we can relate to each other as people as well. Not just the sort of the parts that within us, we tend to totalize each other. So, you know, if there's somebody who's very aggressive and perhaps violent, we tend to sort of like, you know, totalize the whole person and it's an aggressive person, when actually when we can understand this from the principles of multiplicity and multiple mind, we can see that it's not the whole person, and that there will be a good reason for why they are behaving in that way. Unfortunately, for some people who've been, you know, exposed to a lot of trauma in the past, you know, these we know that these are protectors, what we call protectors in the system. They become extremely dominant, and that's all that we can see in the other person. So we're kind of seeing this a lot in our communities at the moment and in society, with what's happening with the Black Lives Matter sort of movement and what's happened over in the States. That we're all trying to figure out how we can relate to each other and understand each other. And there's kind of a lot of a judgment around at the moment around being racist in using these terms. And, you know, suggesting Dick Schwartz has been doing some great podcasts at the moment, just helping us to understand that these are parts within our system We understand that, you know, these kind of burdens that our parts are carrying come from cultural legacies as well. And when we look at trauma and the way that it's laid down and embedded deep within our systems, and that we have parts that hold these energies, it's understandable why we have these kind of energies within us. And it's an important step forward, I believe, as well, where we can stop judging it in each other and really start to have compassion and get curious about why we're responding to things in the way that we are. Um, as he says, you know, our prisons are full of people that have been misunderstood, that have been vilified for the way that their protectors have made them operate in society. So I don't know whether somewhere I could sort of list some little links about some podcasts that you could tap into there. Um, yeah, we understand that, you know, that part that was cutting was actually forced, coming back to that client, was actually forced into that role in order to protect. Um, you know, and it seems as though there's kind of like an illogic to the logic behind it. But when we understand that this system is developed in our childhood, and it kind of just takes resources that it's already seen in our environment. So quite often in our childhoods, we are parented, and this is not to blame. This is just the way that it is. But we're parented in quite critical ways, because that's the way our parents were parented as well. Hopefully, this is a paradigm that we're coming out of as we begin to open up our awareness now. So parts often take on those kinds of energies in order to motivate us and to protect us. When it comes to sort of perpetrator kind of energy, if we're being violated, often the part we don't have any choice. We have to kind of absorb that in those times when we're being violated. That energy has to go in somewhere. It has to be absorbed into the system. So it's almost like a part will volunteer to take the bullet and hold the trauma, hold the memory network of the trauma, and hold that in the system. And then another part in the system will then use that perpetrator energy as a way to protect it, if that makes sense. Yeah, so we can understand how, you know, perpetrators were abused themselves, and this is how this kind of chain is developed. So again, we've got so much more scope to have compassion and understanding for this. And Dick has done a lot of work with people with complex PTSD. He's worked with offenders in the prison system, people that might have been kind of written off as being sociopathic. He's even worked with sex offenders and paedophiles, and, you know, it's opening up a whole new possibility of what can be achieved in terms of really deep healing when we understand that this system is not who we are. It's not essentially who we are. It's the system that's come to help us. Who we really are remains intact always, and that's the divinity within us that we refer to as self energy in this model. Um, that I will talk about a little bit more in a moment, because the self energy aspect to this, again, it's very different to other psychotherapy models. Is really 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 important. Um, so, you know, because as we tap into that energy, we realize that's the energy that we can use to heal ourselves and each other. It's really really exciting. So yeah, actually, I will talk about self energy a little bit more. I've been exploring that more this year, and I was all very much about the parts, and let's learn about these parts, and getting really fascinated connecting with them. But self energy is, um, it's kind of, you know, it's beautiful, and it's the energy that within us that we're kind of searching for, and that we think we can only reach through this mystical experience of enlightenment. And we think also like we can only have enlightenment if we have perhaps meditated for 8 hours a day, or we've become a yogini, or we actually live in a cave and we only eat one grain of rice every single day. And if we try hard enough, then we'll reach this kind of moment. And, you know, so I love about IFS, like we just realize it's not about that at all. And maybe we're really ready for this as spiritual beings. So to dare to look into and acknowledge and recognize this massive, huge source of spirituality and enlightenment. The enlightenment is just sitting inside us. It's just chilling out at the back, you know, it's kind of waiting for us, and it's guiding everything. It's kind of is essentially overseeing everything as well. Um, and, you know, we only get rare glimpses into the self energy. It doesn't happen that often. And this is what we think we're all kind of looking for out here in the world, you know. But actually, it's all just contained within us. And he's he sort of lists these qualities that just conveniently all begin with the letter C, which is great. But there's more to it than that. Also, it's just to help us to sort of to connect with that. But the qualities here that he's noticed the most are calm, connection, compassion, creativity, clarity, curiosity, confidence, and courage. And these are like our divine qualities that we all have. And they're there all of the time. And, and if we're not feeling those qualities, and any time that we're not, and it's very rare we actually do get into those moments of really feeling that. If we're not feeling those, then that's an indication that we're actually in a part. So every single thought, feeling, image, physical sensation, emotion that we're experiencing is all coming from the part system. We actually call what we call we're in a part, or a part is in us. It's actually what we call blended into our system. So even our opinions and what we think our attitudes are, and all the things that we really identify with, like we think it's who we are. We identify with our personality, which gets, it gets interesting when we realize that there's lots and lots and lots of them. One day we might be in this personality, and another day. So when we come outside of that and we're actually going into self energy, that is an enlightenment. That's essentially what it is. And what all we need to do as spiritual human beings is clear away the obstacles, the intrusions that are coming in from the system that feel like they have to be doing that to keep us safe, through a healing process. So it's not through sort of I mean, the ego, this does get a really bad press, and it's something that we should be transcending or killing or whatever, but we can't. It is who it's a big part of us. Although some approaches say that it doesn't even exist, and all these kind of really weird and wonderful things. What we're doing is turning into it and healing it. Yeah. So it's about getting into right mind, but also making the mind right. When we free up the trauma energies that are in there, it's actually a really powerful, beautiful way of self-expression, using the energy to help us to express. So I've actually really come to know this system as being very, very, very sacred. One of my clients actually had a download the other week, and the message that came through was like, "You've no idea what this ego has had to go through to be here for you." It's very sacred. All the parts within it, when we go in and we start to explore it, all have self energy within themselves as well, and they all have parts. They're like us. It's complex. They're multiple, like we are as well. They are autonomous little beings in there that, when we connect with them, all actually have their own histories. They all have their own reasons for being there. They're very multidimensional, and yeah, and it's very fascinating to get to know them. So the notion, the understanding, the reconnection with self energy is actually the real hub, the spiritual hub of the IFS model, and it's kind of like a really powerful way for people to find a way to access that and do that. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit more about the parts now, and so yeah, they're already with us, and they take on different energies and re-roll. We use this term a lot. They re-roll in the face of adversity to protect us. They're all in there together. They're all mixing there together. It's like a whole. Actually, it's like a whole world. We could look at it like a village. um, that's in there, and they're all carrying, not all of them, but they're carrying burdens, and they're all interacting with each other. It's also quite polarized. I'm not going to talk about that too much now, but the way that they kind of arrange themselves is that they become polarized in the way that they develop as managers. And so this really helps us to understand the nature as well, and we get a little bit more metaphysical and quantum physical about the realm that we are in. That we understand that it helps us to understand the realm of duality that we are, and this kind of constant need. We're seeing a lot of that at the moment as well. Every narrative, every event, everything's splitting all of the time. I think it's like an invitation for us to understand, yeah, all the time, Carolina, just helping us to understand polarity and the nature of polarity as it is within us. We've all heard that expression as well, you know, as without, as within, so without. And I'm beginning to understand more and more about, you know, that how powerful this is, how powerful this kind of projector room is. We could see it as that in its role in actually creating our reality, or our experience of our reality, in a kind of a way which is, again, is perhaps another talk, but in a way it's kind of creating situations out in our life day to day, and people and traumas and things, to help us to just to purely to reflect back in and go into the system to understand it and to heal it. I think this is a huge part of our process in mankind. Um, they actually, when they do, in the face of trauma, take that bullet, as it were, they actually become frozen in the time and space, and in a kind of aversion sense of who we are in that moment when that thing is happening to us. So, so they're still stuck back there. Especially when we talk about the parts that have taken the burden of the trauma, we call these exiles in this system, because they become frozen and stuck in there. They're oblivious to what's happening in the rest of the system. In that time as well, during trauma, it becomes separated from the self energy. So when we're younger, we might have a close connection to that and be coming in and out of self energy as children into the system, and there's more flow there. As we get exposed to more and more adversity whilst we're growing up, that system becomes more and more disconnect from the motherboard. I was going to say there, but you know, from the essence of who we are. So it also, not only does it feel traumatized by what's happened, it actually feels abandoned by us as well. And this is why we've really got to look at meditation practices, um, and the kind of value, whether there is value in that. There is value in that in terms of that here. But the more and more we kind of distract ourselves and move away from this connection, the more distressed the system can actually get. Because deep down, it's really, really yearning for connection. And we can relate to that as human beings as well. Like, who's not yearning for deep connection and love in our societies? This is exactly what the parts are as well. But it's almost like it's become hopeless. You know, it's given up. Like the severance, if you like, to it feels like it's absolute and it's forever. So it feels like it's there, very, very disconnected. So, and the goal for the IFS is to navigate this and go in and help to free them from that and get them out of these predicaments. Um, so Dick Schwartz realized as well that they do arrange themselves in a specific way. And also, you know, it kind of helps us to understand in other therapies as well that we have to go in carefully. We don't just push our way into the system and go straight to the wounds, because, you know, that those are the parts that need the help, as it were. But we've got to be very careful when we understand that there are protector energies. There are other parts in the system that have taken on the role as protector to stop any more harm coming in, and also to stop the world from seeing the exile, because if that happens, then we may be liable to even more trauma and pain, basically. So, so I'll talk. The managers are absolutely fascinating, a fascinating sort of layer. So the exiles are very delicate, very injured. They sort of become encrusted or encased. Often when we connect with them, they are literally in caves, or they're in cages, or they've been pushed underneath somewhere. We might also call this implicit memory in other models as well, or repressed memories. They are holding the memory network of what happened. We might also refer to them as sort of, you know, when we're talking about inner child work and wounded child kind of approaches as well. This is what we're referring to, which is deeper in the system, which is in the exiles. And we've all got them. We've all got exiles in there to a lesser or greater degree. But when we have a whole bunch of exiles there that within our system, then things are very sensitive, you know, and the system has to work very, very, very hard to sort of keep them repressed. So, you know, we know some people who are more delicate, we might say, or more sensitive than other people, perhaps, you know. And when we can really understand it from a parts perspective, we can understand why that poor person is holding more exile energy in their system. It's also like, you know, the rest of the system is hyper vigilant to them all of the time, and the need to protect. The fear within the system is that an exile is going to burst out and flood the rest of the system with the trauma energy. And that to the system would be the end of the world, okay? Because it thinks that you're going to go back into the trauma. There is a completely different, if any, sort of concept of time and space when we're in the inner realm. It's not a linear thing like we're conditioned to believe. It's totally different. So it doesn't think that there's just going to be a memory of the trauma that's going to come forward. You're going back into the trauma, okay? And we can see it we can see this happening for people in our lives perhaps. So, and that's absolutely terrifying, and it becomes a matter of life and death actually, that these exiles remain suppressed and repressed at all times. So we have another layer, if you like, of helpers in there that we call managers, or the protector energies. And these are really interesting. These are really the thoughts. These are really kind of more of the thoughts that we're hearing in our mind. There's a whole team of them. Who knows how many? There's a whole team of them that we call perhaps preemptive managers. And they're working hard every single day for repression, and also to make sure that we're keeping the outside environment safe as well at all times. So we've got manager parts. We're all going to relate to this because this is like everybody. We've got manager parts that are managing our relationships with others. How do I look? Am I saying the right thing? Are they going to like me? Is it okay? They're not going to judge me in these sort of things. We've got other parts that might want to keep people at arm's length because we don't want them to see in. The parts actually think that they're protecting the real us, like who we really are. We think the exiles are the real us. Here's my dog just joining in here. So we often sort of can want to keep people at arm's length, and like not, we don't want people to see what we think is the real us. And we feel that a lot as well. For example, when somebody gives us a compliment, someone says like, "Oh my God, you're just such an amazing person." Hi, Eddie. Thanks for joining us. We often hear the response from the system like, "Oh my God, they don't know who I am," as an automatic, as a given. So we have parts in the system that do that. We have parts that are managing our performance and how well we're doing in the world. So we have ego terms, things like success and failure, and these kind of words, and what we should be doing are all coming from the system. These are words that they have created in order to keep us motivated, like you should be doing more. You get loads of qualifications and people will see how clever you really are. They're not going to really see how damaged you are and how petrified you are. So off we go into the world and we start doing these things. We've got parts that are scanning the environment all of the time. They're very, very hypervigilant, and that's tuning into our nervous system as well. So we might have to, if someone says, "Do you want to come to a party?" Whew, parts are in there. Is this going to be okay? Who's going to be there? Are people going to be drinking? Is this going to be all right? I'm going to be able to stay in control. We have the controlling parts, and that give us the illusion that we can maintain some level of control enough so that we don't get violated or hurt any deeper than we already are. And things seem to be okay in the world as long as the parts think that they can sort of keep in control and be managing things. But that's an awful lot to manage. That's going on. And they're using the body and the myofascia and the system and the physical symptoms and the emotions all the time to keep us on our toes and do what it wants us to do. Some of them sort of help us to dissociate and numb out so that we don't have to feel intense emotions. And you know what? They never sleep. We're even listening to them and seeing them in our dreams. How many of us have dreams that we're being chased down the street and that something bad's going to happen to us at any minute, and this kind of thing? So it can even help us to understand how we can relate to our dreams when we understand the system as well. So they are never, ever, ever, they never, ever switch off. We're feeling it all the time. We feel exhausted. We might feel like we can't cope. We're overwhelmed, and as we're kind of like coping with and contending with their efforts to keep us safe all of the time. So even with, and I could talk all day, it's fascinating. There's so many different layers to this, but even with the best will in the world, and no matter how hard that they try, just noticing what time it is, that's gone really quickly. What can happen is that life doesn't work like that, and sometimes things do push through and we do get activated. The exiles do get activated, and then we're in it, and then the exile's blended with us. So I've had an experience of that with somebody this week who, in an ordinary situation, felt like a little girl and was absolutely terrified and feeling really unsafe, which from an objective point of view is a very safe situation, but she'd been activated and it didn't seem like that way at all. So what happens then is we're in the exile, and then we have other managers that come in that we call in this model the firefighters. They jump in and they just want to put the flames of all the emotion out and sort of like dampen the exile down, and they do that very, very quickly. And this is now moving into the realms of what we might call addictions. Usually it'll just grab for something that maybe we picked up in our childhood or whatever, but a substance usually, and just something that's going to douse the flame. So it could be some alcohol, or so drugs, or just, we've also sort of, it could just be going out shopping or just doing something that we have to get out of this state. We'd want to distract ourselves from that in some sort of way. But this also creates, as we know with addictions, all kinds of other different sort of kind of interactions in the system as well. So yeah, and I only noticed this the other day. Either wants to numb us and get us out, get the flames out, or it wants to take us higher than the flames as well, by literally by getting us high. And that's what we do when we're sort of reaching out for those kinds of substances as well. So there are a lot of kind of practices out there as well. Our whole society, if we look at it through these lenses, is kind of equipped to keep us kind of distracted from our exiles. We can go to the casino, we can go shopping, we can go to the pub, we can go and get, go on a dance floor, we can get lost in something. It's all out there. And there's also, some of this as well is kind of disguised as being healthy. I was quite addicted to running when I was a bit younger, and I felt okay as long as I could run, because that just seemed to be something that would keep the exiles down a lot. We can find that as well with meditation practices we can use to sort of try and deal with exiles, but we're not dealing with them. So that's not to say they don't have the place; they absolutely do. But we can go deeper. We can go deeper. So in the IFS model, the focus is to carefully access and go in and release the energies of the exile, so that we don't end up in patterns of keep being activated. There are steps to the actual healing process as well, which are very shamanic actually in their principles. The first feature is that when we do align, and what we do is use the self energy to align with the exile. Once we've had permission from all the managers that it's safe to go in there and do that, we align and we take the exile through a process. First of all, we witness and we really honor the trauma. Sometimes we have to take them out of the situation that they're frozen in, and then we take them through what we call an unburdening, which is more like a shamanic practice of actually letting go of the energies. And you really feel that happening to you as well when you're working with your system, as we let go once and for all. And what we say is all the ways that this has been stored in your body, and actually let go of that on a very, very deep level. So when we do that as well, and we're connecting from that place of self energy, we're restoring that connection, we're restoring faith back into our systems, we're getting into a relationship with it, and we're becoming more and more what we call self-led, not parts-led or ego-led. We're becoming self-led. We're bringing this beautiful energy to the surface into our everyday lives and operating from that place, not from a reactionary kind of management place. We're coming from a place of self leadership that we call here. Okay. So I was going to talk us through a meditation, but now I'm realizing we really don't have the time to do that. But if you watch out for, if you friend me on Facebook, or just watch out for, it's the Internal Family Systems Manchester group. I'm going to be putting some meditations on there. As I say, we have a physical meeting space as well when we can do that again. So also, if you look at the ifsinstitute.org website, there are lots and lots of resources on there, and videos and explanations. There's lots of groups on Facebook. There's even sort of IFS meditation groups on there as well that you can have a look at. I have a resource list that I can send out to people as well, with lots of interesting things on. And you know, the advice is that when you're beginning on this journey is to just really start to work with yourself on a manager's level. You need somebody with you, ideally, when we start to deepen this process and connect with the exiles, because we can very easily get overwhelmed and overwhelm the system and the managers. So you know, if you are interested and want to start focusing in, what I suggest to people, that the first thing that you can do is just start to be aware of your system. And that really means just listening to your thoughts, just listening to how you're reacting to things and being curious about it. Don't feel ashamed or judgmental towards yourself because you keep judging somebody. You know, we're all judgmental. We've all got these parts in our system. Um, and we can't help it at the moment. It's just the way that it is for the time being, and we've just got to meet ourselves and each other where we're at with that. So bringing compassion into just your own beginning self-awareness of the system, and going, wow, yeah, you know, why I've just judged that person's shoes, or you know, someone's just said such and such a thing, and I feel really jealous about that. That's great. That's brilliant, because that's something that we can start to connect with curiosity and go, who is that part that does that? I wonder what it's protecting and behind that. And just beginning to get to know it and to connect with it in that kind of way, just for starters. And as I said, Dick Schwartz's book, Greater Than the Sum of the Parts of Us, I think is an absolutely fantastic starting point.
Thank
Whew, that went really
you.
quickly.
That's amazing.
Hey,
Can I share something? And I think
yeah, please.
to go over a few minutes, I think Neil will be fine with that. If somebody else wants to share, please unmute yourself.
Yeah,
I'd like to share because, of course, I've done a few sessions with you and Christian.
yeah,
And at the beginning, for me, the whole concept is quite difficult to grasp. And because the type of person that I am, logical in some parts, very intuitive, but also very like, I want to understand this. I was like, do I use my imagination? Do I not use my imagination? You know, does it help to get there? Does it not help? Is it, if I use my imagination, am I faking parts? All that kind of thought going on. But now where I'm at with it at the moment is that it really, like when you say all about those thoughts and things, I didn't realize how much of a disconnection I had with my inner world.
yeah,
I could hear my thoughts. Of course, I could hear my thoughts. I was doing things. I thought I was very aware, you know. I thought I'm a person who is like, I used to stop and think and all that kind of thing. But actually, my inner world was trying to communicate with me so many times, and I just couldn't listen, didn't understand.
yeah,
So now I'm like, when there's that part that is really coming at me and I feel very aggressive, okay, so what is underneath there? What's the need for you to speak to me like that? And I understand now. So sometimes it can be like you say, okay, am I doing something that is going against my system so strongly that I need to bring all these things? And then the next step, I guess, it is, okay, is it because of past experiences?
yeah,
Can we go into that? Is it
yeah,
because there was a real reason for it? Have I created, you know, all of those digging? Because ultimately for me, it's like that sensation of using that to help me to get wherever I want to, right? And tap into the energy. And I just think, just want to share with everyone how powerful this language can be. And somebody wrote on the chat before when you were talking about the protectors.
yeah.
She said, I'm not going to say the name, but she said, she wrote it on the group chat. She says, "This is incredible and powerful. The part was there to protect. Just shifted my thinking right there." Because I think it's
Amazing.
the moment, that story you were talking about, that lady. It's such an easy way to connect, right? Wow, it's so obvious when you say it.
Yeah, when you say it, because you know, we've all been so ashamed of the way that we feel and the way that we're interpreting. And so we haven't been sharing these things. We think it's something that there's something wrong with us, you know, and especially in that mono mind kind of perspective. But when we can understand that we've all got this system, that everything that it's a really interesting point about, you know, everything that we are reacting to in what feels like the present is actually something that's resonating, that's happened to us before, and it's activating, and we're kind of superimposing it into the present. that's how we're reacting. This is why, it does look like we're irrational, it doesn't look logical, and people, can't understand it. But this just brings it all to life. Like, it's super, and like it makes sense. Like, I can't not look at life through these lenses now. I can't not look at people, can't not look at culture through that level of understanding, because this, for me, this is how it is. And I've seen the evidence of it over and over. I mean, all therapists in this community say that. There's probably, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of people have gone through this process, that this is how it actually is, and I've seen huge shifts in my own life. And people just saying after sessions, perhaps, I was cooking dinner and I realized I wasn't super stressing about setting the table or what people were going to think or this kind of thing. I just actually enjoyed cooking dinner, and I could be present. We can't be present. We're trying to kind of bypass by being present. Let's be present, Actually, we can't when we've got this system that's constantly doesn't want to let its guard down at all. It's communicating with us all the time. It's only when that's healed that we can really appreciate and enjoy being in the present, and feel safe to do that. It's a really huge word, this kind of need that we all have to feel safe here. And then we can even start to look at enlightenment. And this is what's been kind of, one of the benefits of the coronavirus, and Dick talks about this, is like when everything got switched off, a lot of our parts had to settle. They had to calm down. They couldn't keep us busy and dashing around day by day and, just looking like everything's okay here. They had to switch off. And we've probably all noticed new parts in our systems, the ones that have not been able to have a look in because we've been so busy, proving how great we are out there or whatever going on, that these other parts have now had the chance to come up, and we've had a chance to explore other aspects of us. We've allowed more self-energy. I spoke to somebody last week, and for the first time ever at the age of 35, she found herself on the couch reading a book for 2 hours. I mean, that just would never have been allowed in her system, because the system would have been saying things like, that's lazy, you're being selfish, it's berating us to keep us motivated to keep going. It's got a pure intention behind the criticism, behind the addictive behaviors. When we go in there, we have never ever met a bad part. There is no such thing as evil. These are not original sinners that are perpetuating these kind of behaviors. These are, they're pure, and it's really heartwarming to connect with them, and so transformative. Completely, it's so transformative. And I just really want to acknowledge again Dick Schwartz and the work that he's done and continues to do. And this model is still unfolding. He's not precious about it. He lets people go and explore different areas with it. We can blend it into breath work. We've done that. We can blend it into even yoga practices, even into everything. Really is absolutely wonderful. And I'm so like appreciating being here and being able to explain it and share this with another audience is just wonderful. Thank you.
I think as we are with Environlution, and the theme this year is about dreaming and my future planet, right? So it just felt right to talk about all these things as how we can incorporating them, and within our own little worlds and our own lives, how we help ourselves to then help the bigger picture into getting to a new place. Thank you, Charmaine. So Charmaine, if people want to find you, I'm correct in thinking your website is www.charmaineberry.com. Is that correct?
.co.uk.
Sorry guys, so
I'm going to be updating it soon. Yeah, .co.uk. Friend me on Facebook. I put everything out on my main Facebook page. Yeah, that's pretty much it really. I've not got around to Instagram yet. So yeah, that's the main place there. But please, or drop me a line if you want to email me. It's info@charmaineberry.co.uk if you've got any questions or anything. Or if there's anything, is anything that might have come up for you during this time, just even being able to relate to our parts. Sometimes they can come pushing forward when we start to connect with them. So if you just want to drop me a line, if you need anything, then please do.
Are you okay if I share your email here? Because I know Jess and some other people have shared in the group. Guys, if you want to say something very quickly, please unmute yourselves and do it. I'll put Charmaine's email on the chat so you guys can contact her as well.
Thank you, Carolina. I'll just ask quickly. I typed in the chat, but it might be easier to ask what you were saying before about what we can take away from this talk, as having just heard about family systems, about dealing with the managers would be like your first step in. So I just wanted to check my understanding of that, because I've got a bit of time today. So when you were talking about the exiles, am I right in thinking that's like a trigger? So when you're taken back to being age, whatever you are, and you've got limited coping skills, but it's the behaviours that come in to protect you from that.
Yeah, the sort of the focus for the system, the priority for the system really is to protect that and stop that from happening, essentially. It doesn't always manage to do that, but that is essentially what it is. So when we find ourselves in those kinds of sensations, when we feel like a child again and we can feel overwhelmed, usually what's happened is an exile is what we call blended with us. There's a really nice little technique where we can actually ask parts to unblend from the nervous system. We can begin to communicate with them in that way. I've got another talk on my page somewhere that talks about that and unblending from parts as well. So yeah, but when we're beginning to go into our own systems, if you're doing it on your own, this is what I meant. Just have an intention just to meet with the managers, so that your exiles don't get triggered. Sometimes they come rushing forward because they can feel that there's an offer of help. The system kind of like wants help, but it also wants to keep it protected. It's got this kind of like real paradox going on there. So, but sometimes they do just move forward, and I've noticed that happen in meditations. For example, we're just in an exile. You know, does that answer your question, Dan? And does that make sense?
So if I can think of triggers, like I've got a list of those, and then think, oh well, how did I actually behave, and what thoughts came to me, and what was in my mind to take me away from that. That's where to focus on.
Yeah, you're kind of mapping out there in a way. Do you know what I mean? You're kind of getting a sense of like, what was the trigger? What looked like the external trigger? What did that feel like? And we can connect with parts by noticing where we feel them. And that's what we do in the therapy, is we focus our attention in to where we can feel this. We call it the trailhead. In America, they call it the trailhead. So we're connecting in, and that trailhead will then, through the guidance of the model, will steer us towards the exile. Usually we do that very, very carefully through the managers, because they don't want to give up their roles. Managers, they're very dedicated, very, very conscientious. Sometimes it takes a lot of persuading to re-believe that the help is available and that change can happen in the system. Sometimes we have to really prove to them that, or they'll let us go to the exile, but they want to stay really close and make sure that we're okay. We've got to, as therapists, we've got to gain the trust of the system and the managers in order to be with the exiles. We've got to gain the trust of the self energy. We've heard that, we're afraid of the light. The system is very much afraid of the light, the self as well. We've got this other paradoxical sort of thing that's happening in there also. So we just tread really carefully and gently.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone who joined us here. Next we have Neil, who is going to be talking about...
Oh, Neil is great. Thank you everybody so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This is recorded, so we're going to share it later. Once it's all edited, it's going to be on social medias, Envirolution, YouTubes, and all sorts of things. So you guys can revisit it and share it with whoever you guys think.
Share it with everybody.
So I'm going to hand it over. Thank you so much, Charmaine.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolina.
Bye.
Guys.
Thank you.
So I'm going to stop sharing.